Tipping, to tip or not to tip? That appears to be the question yet again as tipping options pop up in new places. Have you seen it? Now customers are facing a screen prompting them to leave $1 or $5 for coffee, goods, and other services that didn't ask for gratuity in the past, something that has revved up in our post-pandemic world. So what do you do? Our Trevor Alt has a look.
You know, post-pandemic world. I don't know why I feel like that was just yesterday, but yeah, that's crazy. Post-pandemic world.
Look at both sides of the debate.
It's lunchtime in New York City, and as hungry patrons take their salads, grain bowls, and smoothies to go, we wanted to know, did you tip for that?
I didn't tip, though.
No?
No, I didn't tip.
Did you have the option on the screen? Sometimes it's like a...
Yeah, I did have the option. I mean, everything's super expensive these days. I only tip when there's restaurant service, really, or taxis.
The thing they do now is they turn the screen towards you, so you kind of feel compelled to give something.
Right.
Even though it's takeaway, so you haven't...
Did you tip them?
You said that they turn the screen towards you, so you feel compelled, even though it's takeaway. Shit, the takeaway is turn that damn screen back towards you. Let's go.
We did? Well, we always do.
It's very weird because we don't pay any tips in Korea and Asia or even Europe. But in the United States, especially New York, it's so high. It's almost 20 is normal.
Tipping is an American tradition, and it's getting a renewed level of attention and scrutiny as prices go up and more services out.
Now, I want y'all to remember what they said. Tipping is an American tradition.
Side of traditional restaurants are asking their customers if they'd like to toss in a few bucks extra. Some people are starting to feel what's been labeled as tipping fatigue.
I think post-pandemic and with the addition of payment screens and seeing inflated tip suggestions, people are really uncertain about what to do out there.
Lizzie Post is the great-great-granddaughter of famed advice columnist Emily Post. Her family just published the 100th anniversary edition of their etiquette advice guide. But even after 100 years, she says the questions of when to tip and how much have never been easy to answer.
Even back then, tipping was a really difficult system, that it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
That is something that I feel like I hear from a lot of people, which is I always tip because I feel like I should, but I don't always feel like I should.
They hear the voices of the workers who get tipped and appreciate the system as it is, and yet they find frustration with it in their own experience. And that's just not a fun balance, because you want to feel good about the money that you're putting out into your community. And when it doesn't feel good, when it feels awkward, I think that's really hard for people to deal with.
Part of that awkwardness may come when presented with this: a touchscreen at the end of your purchase asking how much you'll tip.
And if you look at how they do the touchscreen, it's like they turn it towards you, like it's part of the process of completing your purchase. You know, like some places you go, your purchase isn't complete if you don't have a receipt. This is like, I guess it was trying to be rap stars when they came up with that, but that's what they said. But the screen turn is almost like part of the finishing up process. Almost like when you put your signature on a pad when you use credit. So it's almost like most people don't read the screen and realize there's a custom. Usually there's not an option to put no tip, but there is always an option to put custom, and my custom is 0.00. You do the math.
15, 20%, or sometimes even more, with the worker often standing right in front of you as you decide. Square is a leader in these point-of-sales devices. They tell us when the pandemic started, tipping became more commonplace to support workers during those takeout orders. And that mentality appears to have stuck. Americans are tipping more than they used to at sit-down restaurants and at quick-service businesses, too.
One of the things we're seeing is that businesses are increasingly starting to diversify their revenue streams. The key example here is something like the coffee shop in my neighborhood that turns into a bar at night.
Kind of
coffee shops being an industry that don't particularly rely on tips a lot, and bars being one that very much does. In our data, that would show up as a seller that is now seeing more tips.
We went to Whitman's in Manhattan. It's a classic burger joint with table service, the bar, and they also use the Square payment system.
It's kind of awkward as a server to stand there and kind of like not try to look at what they're going to tip, because you don't want them to feel like I know, like, yeah,
I'ma show
so
you
it's
too.
just like,
You can see what I'm
people definitely
on
tip
that.
more.
Owner Larry Kramer says based on his years of restaurant experience, he believes the current system of tipping works best for everyone.
What happens is some person might tip 30%. Some person might tip 18. So the server makes a lot more by getting tips.
All right, now what you think about what he just said? He's the owner, right? He talking about somebody might tip 30%, somebody might tip 18%. What happens is the server gets more money. That's your job to pay the server. That is not my job as a consumer to supplement your inability or your unwillingness to pay your servers a working wage. We'll get into the working wage later, but let's let them finish.
Interesting.
So really, it also motivates the server to do well. It's their responsible for their customer. The customer feels that and they tip out.
And you think actually if you did away with the tipping, your servers would make less money?
Yes.
Yes, they're going to make less money because I'm going to pay them less. That's what he should have said. You can tell by the way he's looking on the screen, looking at his lips like that. That's that. Don't ask me no additional questions look. You know that look.
You know a lot of other restaurateurs?
Yes, I do.
Do they generally feel the same way that you do about the tipping structure?
I think it's pretty much a consensus now in the industry, and that's why those QSRs are adding tips to their business. Before, you wouldn't have it at a Sweet Green or a Dig or a coffee shop, but they're adding a tipping mechanism as well because it helps pay for the employees.
Well, minimum wage.
See, he just said it. They're adding a tipping mechanism as well because it helps pay for the employees. So you as a consumer not only are paying for the product, now I'm paying the workers that you employ. How does that make sense? Like from a financial standpoint, as a consumer. Now it makes sense as a business owner, and that's less I gotta pay so I can afford a G-Wagon I got sitting outside. Y'all seen it, especially when I go to them seafood boil places. You know who drive that G-Wagon.
Varies from state to state. Federal law says businesses can pay tipped employees as little as $2.13 an hour.
Doesn't have to
There
pay.
are calls
Can.
to
They can
end
pay 'em
tipping culture,
$3.13
requiring
if they want
businesses
to.
to pick up the full tab for their employees' pay. But many in the restaurant industry who rely on tips, including at Whitman's, think that would actually work against them.
Would you vote to switch for the set salary, or would you keep it the way it is?
I'd keep it the way it is.
Why?
The good weeks can be really, really good, and even the bad weeks, I think, are still enough.
There are several restaurants trying out a different approach. Dirt Candy serves a vegetarian menu, and tipping is not an option. Instead, the pay for their workers like Jay Shelley starts at $28 an hour.
Everyone who's sitting down, they know that we're not a tipping establishment, and it like lightens it a little bit. I will take the less money in a situation where I feel like the environment, it's a little bit less stressful.
Still, Jay Shelley does have a second job that does accept tips.
I also like the option at the Wesley where I'm making tips because it is more unpredictable and that can sometimes be very fun.
But the tipping questions extend beyond food service. Take ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. Sometimes riders have no idea what's expected of them, and the drivers can tell.
You don't know what they're thinking back there. You don't know if they're quietly going, gosh, this guy, I can't drive. Did I play the wrong band?
You know, and that's a real thing. I play the wrong band. Play what you play. I mean, you could ask for requests. You're not a DJ, you're a driver, but you can ask for requests like, what do you want to hear? Some people will tell you, some people won't. So, I don't know. Maybe you should invest in like Apple Music so you can just customize the music selection to the driver that you got with you. What we're expecting is you to get me there in one piece, safe and sound.
Did I not get on the highway correctly?
St. Louis resident Dan Buffa started as an Uber driver just as the company implemented tipping. Uber now displays tipping options more prominently in the app. Dan says he's noticed the difference.
The real chunk of where you made your money is tipping. Tipping can take it from an okay night to a very, very good night.
He says if the driver got you home safely after a night out, that is worth a few extra bucks to say thank you. The same could be said for cab drivers, something Professor Kwabna Donkor knows quite well. He paid for graduate school working as an NYC cab driver, and now he studies tipping.
This must be his LinkedIn. Where do you get these pictures from? This has to be his LinkedIn. This man is posted up against the car like it's a yellow Lamborghini. I had to like, it's hard for me to say yellow sometimes because, you know, the two L's together. This man's posted up like it's a yellow Lamborghini, lean on it with his two-tone suit. And somehow ABC found these photos. Either they found these photos, they staged this photo shoot, or he submitted them. But we see you. You fly.
Given that I'm from Ghana, I found tipping to be quite peculiar. And to top it up, even during my uncomfortable or negative interactions with passengers, that didn't seem to have much of an effect on whether I was tipped or the amount which I was tipped at.
Professor Don Core says the origins of tipping here are somewhat murky, perhaps starting with wealthy Americans in the mid-1800s.
If you do know that aristocrats are the ones who tip and you wanted to, you know, improve your status in the eyes of people, you would engage in this particular act. And so once you have a critical mass of people who are actually engaging in this particular act, you know, it becomes mainstream and everybody.
Do you button your button all the way to the top, or do you let it stay open? I'm not one for really letting it stay open. I'm all about buttoning all the way to the top. That's just me.
Everybody wants to seem quote-unquote cool.
Some point to it taking further hold after the Civil War, with one railroad company using tipping as a way to avoid paying a livable wage to newly...
Whoa, what'd I say? Detroit, huh? What's that? That man got a bottle of Taylor Port. Somehow this man bought a bottle of liquor on the tray. And he put it on the edge of the tray and it's standing up. I don't know why Detroit, Indianapolis, and Dayton are all in red. They kind of do that kind of like so you can read it differently. Or they're trying to signal like these are the danger zones. Especially at Detroit. Let's go.
Freed slaves.
Where you have the transition of freed blacks into the workforce. And, you know,
wait.
That transition wasn't...
I didn't mean to pause. Freed blacks? Say slaves. Black slaves, let's go.
And as tipping has made its way further into the culture, the motivation behind it appears to have changed.
85% of people say they tip because it's a social norm, but then you have only about 15% of people who say, well, look, I tip because I am worried about getting terrible future services if I don't do so.
Regardless of why we tip, the practice doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
The point of tipping, I mean, the word gratuity has the word gratitude in it, and that might be something that helps us get back to figuring out where a good middle ground with tipping is, I feel like.
She said it right there. You're tipping because of the gratitude that you feel, the service that you were provided. This piece was spot on. Our thanks to Trevor and the rest of the team that worked on this. Now, we wanted to know what you do when you're faced with different tipping options. So we put a poll on our ABC News Live Instagram story. Go check it out. 71% of you tip when buying coffee. At a restaurant, most people tip 20% instead of 15 or 25%, and 82% do not tip when shopping for non-essentials. So if you would like to weigh in, you can. Scan this.
All right. So my opening thoughts from the Cardi Black view and the Cardi Black edition, you know, tipping is not mandatory. All right. It's optional, meaning it's not mandatory. So throughout the video, we heard a couple people say, you know, I feel like it's a social norm to tip. Social norms and what's considered common or part of a commonality doesn't make it the rule, all right? It makes it what's more likely to happen than not, all right? So you don't have to tip. Don't feel ashamed if you don't tip. Don't feel like you're being evil if you don't tip. You just not a tipping type. Cool. We looked at the history of it, you know. Let's get into the history of it, you know. Let's check that out. have a different little standpoint.